Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to another amazing session with the Book of Illuminations. This has been such an incredible journey so far, and I'm so excited to see how much deeper we get in. I wanted to start, of course, by highlighting yesterday's, as usual, incredible khutbah. It was really special, very powerful. It was called The Covenant of Light and the Imams of Darkness. And Sheikh starts out by reminding us as Muslims that we are representatives of God, representatives of light. So, he used a really nice phrase, team light, but reminding us that as Muslims, as individuals, that we are the embodiment, the representation of the divine. And so we should emanate light in all that we do. And when we don't, we are not living up to our responsibility or our covenant with God. It's a really powerful starting point. And then he gets into the big news from this week, obviously, which a lot of people had pointed out, is the disparity between how the world was watching this submersible on a, with 5 people on it, trying to go down and view the Titanic at $250,000 a seat. Versus a ship in the Greek waters that had about 750 people on it, 700 of which perished, and they were, for the most part Muslim, and how, the Greek authorities were watching this boat, recognizing that it was in trouble, that people were in dire straits, refusing for a while when it capsized to actually intervene, and, the media really didn't talk about it. And, for those of us, obviously, watching and feeling the anger at this disparity, it's just such a, clear demonstration of where we are in our world. And the thing that was, I thought, really powerful is, a lot of people reported on just viewing this disparity, but Sheikh took it further for us to understand the dynamics from a Muslim perspective and how, a situation like this arises when you have so many people that are escaping their Muslim countries because their situations are simply unlivable, and they know the risks that they're facing when they decide to pay money, a lot of money, to jump, on one of these ships that most likely, may result in their death. It's obviously a very harrowing trip, but it's like you have decided that, okay, well, I'm already dead where I am. I might as well try. It doesn't matter, if I die on this, it's not like I've necessarily lost anything. And it's so painful because we understand that, who would make that decision? Who would rather, leave their home and take this fateful journey than stay? And these are Muslim countries where, these are decisions that are made by people. This is not a situation, as Sheikh points out, God didn't create these situations for Muslims to want to escape their homelands. It's people, and it's dictators who are propped up by, whether it's the US government, whether it's the West, people who are in power, who have been reassured by the dictators at the heads of these countries that they will keep their Islam populations in control. And so he walks us through that whole, backdrop and connects the dots. It's extremely powerful. And the most important part about that, when we talk about the Imams of Darkness, is this is also supported by the narrative of many of these imams that are paid, by these governments who basically try to tell the Muslim population, don't worry about politics, don't worry about standing up for justice. These dictators are part of God's plan. Your religion, your job is just to stay at home and pray, take care of your family, don't get involved. I mean, we've all heard this before. What's now been termed political Islam is basically another way to refer to standing up for justice, standing up for rights, and honestly living up to the covenant of light that God has given us. And so it's a really important wake up for us as ethical Muslims, obviously in 2023, to get really active and get knowledgeable and educated about what's happening, and then trying to figure out what we can do in our world, and also standing up to these Imams of Darkness and say, no, that is not what our Islam calls for. It's not what our Quran calls for. It's not what God expects of us in this covenant of light. So it was a really, really beautiful, powerful khutbah. So I really encourage people to go back and watch that or listen to it. If you prefer podcast, we also have now Usuli.supercast.com, which is a podcast platform which allows you to listen to khutbahs, the Book of Illuminations, and also ultimately all of the tafsir through your favorite podcast platform, be it Spotify or Apple Music or others. I also wanted to just share, from this week, we daily get messages, emails, communications, from all different sources, writing to Sheikh, writing to Usuli, people who have found us or heard about us, or maybe have been following, Sheikh's scholarship for many years. And every single day we get people writing about the crises of faith that they are confronting. It's obviously, we talk about this a lot, we have talked about this a lot over, the course of the last 3 years that we've especially been doing a lot of these halaqas. I just wanted to point out, I wanted to share one letter that Sheikh responded to, because it's really, when we get these messages, a lot of times people have come across something, they've heard something, someone has told them something, they've done a little bit of reading about a hadith, and they find something that is obviously, propped up by the Islamophobic narrative of our time, that is designed to create doubt. And, they often will write Sheikh and ask for him to answer, a particular question or a particular issue, or does the hadith really say that? Did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, really, do this with his wives or with, Aisha or whatever? And it's almost like they just feel like they need a video or a Band-Aid fix or something that addresses that. And, so much of what we've been doing and putting out has been really not like a Band-Aid fix and not like, stopping the bleeding, although there's so much bleeding, everywhere. But it's really to say, let's get at the heart of this problem. Let's actually, approach this in terms of starting at the fundamentals. What is really at the root cause? And, do you want a Band-Aid, or do you want a cure to this disease? And honestly, the cure is reconnecting with the Quran and reconnecting with the work that we've been doing here. Because it's understanding, if you ask yourself, do you really know the Quran, or how well do you know the Quran, and how well do you know what the Quran has to say for 2023 and the things that we face today that maybe didn't exist 100 years ago, 1400 years ago, even 50 years ago? I would argue that the things that we've covered through the tafsir over the last 3 years is exactly the medicine for all of what people are encountering out there in this very Islamophobic world. So let me just share this message, because, when I read Sheikh's response, I thought it was really important. And just to paraphrase, the message that we got, this particular one, although it's, it's representative of many. Dear Sheikh, I have been a long-time conscious listener of your content, an avid reader of your books and articles, and hold your interpretations dear to my heart, knowing that Allah only knows the truth. 2 years ago, I had a deep existential crisis. I had depression and anxiety that manifested into daily panic attacks. Much of my depression and anxiety seeped into my spiritual life, and I was unable to find God, understand the concept of God, and Islam made no sense to me. Lately, and this is someone who was raised in a Muslim family, but the faith, was never forced on this person. Lately, my spiritual disconnect has come back, so much so that I feel a deep existential emptiness, and I would be eternally grateful if you could maybe make a video about spiritual disconnect and ways to combat it in this age, or even direct me to some readings that can assist me in reconnecting with God. And Sheikh answered, again, by saying, it is perfectly normal to go through these bouts of doubt and weakness. I have spoken about crises of faith in so many videos and lectures. What contributes to crisis of faith are factors such as 1, exposure to Islamophobic propaganda, 2, limited knowledge that is incapable of addressing long-standing unanswered questions, 3, negative influence from family, friends, or community, and 4, a lifestyle that is inconsistent with Islamic principles that results in irreconcilable paradoxes, unsatisfied longings, or aspirations that result in a sense of frustration and moral contradiction. These are the major reasons, but there are many other causes. The cure is to listen to the Quran halakas and study this material carefully and to commit to internalizing the lessons of the Quran. I am currently giving halakas on the aphorisms of Ibn Atta. Study these halakas and work diligently to internalize the lessons taught. It is also important to read books like The Prophet's Pulpit and The Conference of the Books, Search for Beauty in Islam. And it is critical to commit to resolving whatever is the root cause of your bouts of doubt. Is there a bad influence in your life? Does your community, friends, and family help or hinder your faith? Do you do things that weigh on your conscience because these things are inconsistent with your faith? And do you listen to and study to the halakas I gave on the Quran? God is real, angels are real, and demons are real. The reality we live in is so thin and artificial, if only people knew. And inshallah, he said he would maybe try to address this again in khutbahs and halakas in the future. But, again, like all of the work that we do here really addresses these issues and these doubts. And, if for 2 years, and, we get lots of people that say for the last 2 years, for the last 3 years in particular, I've been suffering. This is the time that we spent going through piece by piece in the Quran. And I cannot tell you, I've gotten countless messages from people who say, I've discovered you, I've discovered the tafsir, I feel like you have transformed my life, you've transformed my faith. And, I just really want to encourage people. I know it seems like a lot. Wow, 3 years of halakas, wow, you've covered the entire Quran. Oh my God, it's too much, where do I even start? But, if you start from the beginning, you start immediately feeling a transformation. You start immediately feeling comfort, and you immediately start seeing that what you're learning is truly foundational, that builds your faith and your confidence from the ground up. And it's reconnecting with the Quran that you maybe never thought you could ever know. Because, also we've heard from people that say, I always thought the Quran was just sort of like random stories, sort of repetitive in some of the verses, like certain things that, there was just, no sense of coherence, right? And I think what's most surprising to people now that we've gone through the entire Quran is that there is an incredible coherence. Every single surah has a unique moral message. And when you put it all together, it is exactly what we need for our time and age, and it's exactly what Muslims need, like the medicine to help us operate and rise and, inspire others and elevate in this very dark time. So I just, I want to encourage people not to get discouraged when they see how much is out there. We try to make it more accessible so you can find it on our YouTube channel. Also, if you subscribe through our podcast, you'll see that now these have been numbered, so you can start at the very beginning and how we covered it. So we start with Surah Al-Hadid. The episodes are numbered 1 through, ultimately, it'll be 164. And that is just an incredible journey. It's the best investment of your time if you are looking for something that will change your outlook and give you a new sense of being Muslim. And so many people have now done this with us, and I believe would testify to the same. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because I know a lot of people are searching, a lot of people are struggling, a lot of people are constantly getting bombarded. And when you're bombarded for 2 years and you're not investing in the counter narrative or learning the counter narrative, of course, I think it would be strange if you didn't have a crisis of faith. So, the answer is obviously to fight back and with knowledge and invest in yourself through this education. So with that, I'm so excited to continue on this particular education, which is just, further extension from the learning from the tafsir. It's so valuable, and thank you everybody for joining us.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على النبي الأمين محمد خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه المختارين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب العالمين. We finished number 10, right? Okay. So inshallah, we start with 11 today, but so the principles 11 to 16 are in, um, in in um, in practice, or if there was a program of mentorship, once you get to 16, once you start, so 17 starts a new phase. And from 1 to 16 are considered essential building blocks upon which everything else is added. And so you spend a great deal of time mastering 1 to 16. And as we will see, indeed, the principles that we have to cover from 11 to 16, in addition, of course, to the 10 principles we've covered, break or introduce critical units that are truly anchoring in very significant ways. So inshallah, we'll talk about that. Before we do this, though, someone, I'm not sure, I mean, I haven't seen the message, but Grace told me about it. Someone said that this project shouldn't be called the Book of Illuminations because it's confusing, because the author, Ibn Ata al-Sakandari, has another book that this person claimed is called the Book of Illuminations. And I just wanted to address this quickly. The only book that this person could possibly have in mind, the only book that the word or something close to the word Illuminations is used in a title by Ibn Ata al-Sakandari is Ibn Ata''s tract, or his treatise, called At-Tanwir fi Isqat al-Tadbir. And At-Tanwir fi Isqat al-Tadbir, you could translate it as illuminating or shedding light upon Isqat al-Tadbir is refuting reliance on af'al, on work, which of course is one of his principles that we've already talked about. And what he means by this is that that becoming an empiricist that thoroughly relies on self-made plans is an obstacle to achieving enlightenment. But as you can tell, I mean, At-Tanwir fi Isqat al-Tadbir, it's not a book of elimination. It's actually quite a short treatise. And At-Tanwir, the word At-Tanwir here, means to shed light or to illuminate a single issue. There is no contradiction between this and calling Kitab al-Hikam the Book of Illuminations. There absolutely no conflict and no confusion. And I doubt very many people know the text التنوير في إسقاط التدبير, which is the only other text which Ibn Ata used the word tanwir, which literally would translate into illumination. So I'm staying with the chosen title of the Book of Illuminations. The other thing that I do, Grace started by talking about these. We do get a lot of messages, a lot, by young Muslims who complain about a crisis of faith. And of course, I am never sure, because you can't tell, I'm never sure if these people who write have in fact listened to the entire halaqas on the Quran, because for me personally, it is very hard to imagine how can someone have a crisis of faith if they listen to the entire halaqas on the Quran. In these halaqas, I discuss so frequently how miraculous the Quran is, and I discuss it from numerous different points of view, the historical, literary, and so on, that it's difficult for me to imagine that someone who could go through the entire halaqas of tafsir and would still experience doubts or so on. Allahu A'lam, ultimately these things are in Allah's hands. But the halaqas on the Book of Illuminations, these halaqas, are also in many ways address this issue of doubt and crisis of faith. If you listen carefully to these halaqas, if you study these halaqas, if you listen to them as many times as you need to in order to absorb everything being said, and if you follow in practical application of what is taught in these halaqas, that in itself addresses the crisis of faith that, and I often suspect that the people who write are so overcome by confusion and so overwhelmed by being bombarded. And in fact, one of the principles, inshallah, we'll talk about tonight, addresses the exact issue of what you allow your heart, the mirror of your heart, to be exposed to. Because that deeply affects what you put into your soul is what you get out of your soul. And if what you put into your soul is corrupt, is toxic, is lethal, then it is hardly a surprise that what your soul will yield will be toxic, lethal, corrupt. This is one of the most elementary lessons you learn in this path. If you want to get to the points of higher irtiqa, where you see Allah in everything, it is impossible to reach that point unless you treat your soul like you treat your body. It is entirely illogical to put toxins in your body and then expect your body to be healthy. If you are inhaling poison, your body will be ill, will be sick. Similarly, if you are intaking toxins into your soul, it is entirely illogical to expect that your soul will yield something healthy. And the confusion sets in is when a part of you have these aspirations, these hopes of, oh yes, I want to get closer to Allah. I want to know Allah. I want to love Allah. But the building blocks are not there. And so it feels like a pipe dream. It's like one of these so-called ex-Muslim Islamophobic sites that one of those people who are having a crisis of faith sent me. You know, the narrative presented by this person is sort of laughable, but tragic at the same time. If it didn't affect people so demonically, it would be laughable. And this person says, oh, you know, Allah, I was told to love you, but, you know, I can't love you because, and then the person proceeds to spew out, to vomit nothing but poison. I mean, you could tell that what went into this person's soul is nothing beautiful. There's no beauty in there. And so for that person to talk about loving God, it's entirely laughable. But I want to, since Grace read the letter, or my response, I want to elaborate upon this because this is part of, as we said, you know, I'm not aspiring to create great Sufi imams through this journey, but this is really for our purposes a journey about faith. So let me address this briefly. One, of course, because we are human beings, in the same way that our emotions swing back and forth. And as we learned from Hikam al-Ata'iyya, that your state of mind is contingent on what you intake, what you allow to enter into your intellect and into your soul. And because we are not usually very disciplined about the intake, we experience mood swings. And mood swings is very human, and it takes a great deal of work and a great deal of discipline to control your mood swings, to in fact have mastery over your mood swings. But in the same way that you have these mood swings, so will your relationship to faith. So what are the main things that cause bouts of weakness in faith or bouts of doubt? Well, there are, start with the ABCs, with the very introductory alphabet. The key issue that often intervenes to create or to spark what ultimately manifests into a state of doubt is the ego, pride. It takes a lot of reflection, a lot of looking yourself in a mirror, peering into the self, to understand how often the self is in fact prideful, arrogant. And it is often pride that makes us, or it is nearly always pride, that makes us become very impatient with questions that we cannot answer. And simply because you individually cannot answer, it is pride that makes us imagine that because I cannot obtain an answer right now, then that means it is either unanswerable, or that means I must be in a state of rebellion until I get an answer. And let me give you a very concrete example. A lot of the people who write will often ask questions scientifically oriented. This is just an example. There is, and often what these people will have listened to information or sources that are either by the so-called new atheists and people like his name is escaping me now, but anyway, they're well known, huh? Oh yeah, Hitchens and the like, the so-called new atheists of the age, who basically regurgitate arguments against intelligent design, or what's even absurd is they're willing to accept that the intelligent design is by aliens who exist somewhere else, who engineered human beings, but not God. And that's a long narrative, but here's just one example. This is a fellow called Hugh Ross. Hugh Ross is an astrophysicist at the University of Toronto. Hugh Ross is a very devout Christian. And he wrote this book, and this is just one example, called The Creator and the Cosmos. A lot of his publications are very scientific in peer-reviewed journals, but he has a few things that he's written sort of to more popular works, like this work. And The Creator and the Cosmos, and in it, Hugh Ross defends the intelligent design thesis, and as an astrophysicist sets out the numerous things in existence that point to a creator, including how intricate the balance is for creation to exist, including how the extreme unlikelihood of life being maintained without an intervening intelligent force that constantly preserves lives. Some of the book is quite technical, and I had to read it a couple of times to even understand what he is saying. But the thing that strikes me about all these Muslims that write and express doubts is that not one of them has bothered they expose themselves to the works of the new atheists, or the works of the Islamophobes, or the works of the ex-Muslims. And the arguments of the ex-Muslims are often quite infantile, quite childish. easily answered by just picking up a book by a devout Christian. Hugh Ross is a very devout Christian. I mean, throughout his book, he seems to believe that the only religion that is consistent with rational science is Christianity. But that's his conviction, whatever. But all these Muslims that write, I mean, you could trouble yourself by just humbly. I know that there aren't many Muslims, and sadly, as many Muslim scientists we have, when Muslim scientists write about science, they're like children. What they write is infantile. But you don't need to go to these Muslim voices. You can pick up a book like one by Hugh Ross or the numerous other Christians or Jews who written defending intelligent design. You could invest the energy and time, and you will find that a lot of the so-called questions and doubts raised by ex-Muslims, because I can't tell you how many times I get messages telling me, oh, the videos posed by these ex-Muslims, they raise points that are very difficult to rebut. And I listen to them repeatedly. I mean, I've listened to more ex-Muslims than I really care to. It's a waste of time and waste of my energy. And frankly, the only reason I do it is because other Muslims don't do it. I mean, other Muslims that should be responding to them or rebutting them don't do it. And so I always listen to the stuff to see if they in fact raise things that are so impossible to rebut. And what I find is that what they're raising are things that a whole genre of literature has rebutted repeatedly by extremely devout Jewish or Christian scientists, and also Buddhist scientists, because the writings on Buddhism and quantum physics are fascinating. Yes, again, Muslims are too busy chasing women and telling them to cover up and wear the hijab. That's another issue. That's because we are colonized and backwards and retarded, and we have a lot of problems. Retarded in the historical sense, meaning behind the times, not in the mental health sense. We are, because colonialism prevented our historical development. It froze our historical development. And remember, colonialism is several hundred years old, so we're still living in the 16th century. We haven't progressed since. We're stuck in the 16th century. Our intellectuals, our institutions. I mean, who discusses in this day and age whether people deserve democracy or don't deserve democracy? That was something that was debated in the 16th and 17th and maybe 18th century. But nowadays, the right to democracy is enshrined in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, in the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It is elementary. Although, yes, a lot of people are living in dictatorships, but even dictatorships claim to be democratic because it has become so elementary that democracy, which is simply a system in which people exercise self-determination, is a basic human right. You talk to Muslim imams and mullahs and whoever you consider to be authoritative, and they're still not clear about this. They still don't understand what self-determination is about and why self-determination is a human right. I mean, that's what happens with the colonized people, okay? Now, the other thing, so the issue of this, the critical issue of humility and So let me give you another example. So many Muslims, right, and say, oh, I'm having a crisis of faith. Why? Because of slavery. People, slavery is an extremely complicated issue. Why is it an extremely complicated issue? Because it is an institution that has existed throughout human history. And it existed throughout human history in many complex manifestations. It has existed in the form of chattel slavery, where slaves were considered nothing else, nothing better than property, not entitled to any rights, hardly human. It has existed as an extension of racism and ethnocentrism. It has existed as an extension of class dynamics. It has existed as an extension of tribalism. It has existed as a system, a social network, where in the absence of the powerful modern centralized state, believe it or not, slavery existed as a social network of care in which people that were on the margins of society found a method of belonging and care. It has existed even as a system that produced leadership. In Mamluk Egypt, slaves became the rulers of society. They became the bosses. They became the ones issuing orders. That is why it's known as Mamluk Egypt, the dynasty of slaves. So it is an extremely complex phenomena that has existed for thousands of years. The reason that slavery became abolished in recent history has a lot to do with economics, with race, with communications, with nation states, with global orders. It is a multifaceted, highly complex issue. Then you have these kids that come and say, why didn't Islam abolish slavery? Imagine if Islam would have abolished something that has existed for thousands of years at a time when the result of abolishing slavery would have been disastrous upon society. Because till today, to our very day, if you go to South Egypt, there are still families, till today, that own slaves. And when you talk to these slaves and you say, listen, Egyptian law has banned slavery, world law has banned slavery, you have every right to be free people, and they tell you, I am a member of this family. I have been a member of this family for hundreds of years. My father was a member of this family. My grandfather was a member of this family. My great-grandfather was a member. And the reason we remain connected to this family is through this institution. I don't want to be free, because freedom means that I no longer am affiliated with a powerful family. I'm not defending the institution. What I'm saying is that it was a whole network where marginalized people, right or wrong, found a place in society. And what Islam did was revolutionary for its age. Moses didn't ban slavery. Jesus didn't ban slavery. In fact, Jesus said that slaves should obey their owners like they obey God. Of course, no Christians are having a crisis of faith because of that. No Jews are having crisis of faith because the Israelites, prophets, enslaved thousands of people, and not just enslaved, but exterminated many of these slaves. All they listen to is Islamophobes and going around with their inflated egos. I want an answer, and I want an answer now. And why weren't they freed? Do you want to take a time machine and go back 1400 years and take care of all the people who would have been left without a social network? Back then, there was no state that provided social security. Back then, there was no state that provided citizenship, or even that kept track of who's alive and who's dead. Back then, if you didn't belong to a network, an affiliation that provided you protection, you could disappear from the face of the earth and no one would ever care or know anything about what happened to you. And that is why what Islam though did is that it said, "Man iqtahama al-aqaba." So Allah said, if you want to be in good standing with me, free your slaves. Allah said, if you want me to forgive your sins, free your slaves. The Prophet ﷺ said, prohibited calling slaves slaves. Said, don't call them abd or abda, call them fataya or fatati. Means my son or my daughter or my boy or my girl. What Islam did was that it came and said they have the right to eat as you eat and wear what you wear. And they have the right to mukataba, to buy their freedom through their own labor. Meaning what? That you don't have a right to their labor, although you own them as slaves. Their labor must be valued and their money must be kept separate so they can buy their freedom. So ultimately, it created all the mechanisms to create freedom, to fight slavery without traumatizing society. And it takes a great deal of reading and knowledge and historical awareness. But because Muslims are unsophisticated, and we are raised to be unsophisticated, with our tradition especially, and because we are not raised to respect knowledge and respect scholarship and respect scholars, I can't tell you the number of times I get messages, I'm having a crisis of faith because why didn't the Prophet free slaves? Chattel slavery was exercised by the Romans and by the modern West. In between the Romans and the West was Islam, which brought an end to chattel slavery. That's what's disastrous about works by these new American Muslims who look only for the evidence they want to find and don't understand the difference, the huge difference between Roman law and slavery and Islamic law and slavery, or between American law and slavery and between Islamic law and slavery. Islamic law never treated slaves as chattel. They were always considered to be human beings, and for the time, it was a revolutionary idea. So revolutionary that Muslim jurists often failed to live up to the principles and ideals of the Quran. When Allah tells you that freeing the slave is iqtiham al-aqaba, how is is overcoming the obstacle to making it to heaven. Making it to heaven is a huge obstacle. And Allah says, well, you want to overcome this obstacle? Free your slaves. And the Prophet ﷺ tells you, you cannot treat slaves lesser than you treat your own children. And if you cannot guarantee that in fact you treat them like you treat your children, you have to free them. What more do you want? So now, take another thing. But I wanted to move on, but this is really basic because, what irtiqa if our children keep experiencing crisis of faith? Crisis of faith also doesn't just come from impatience and arrogance and a huge ego. But crisis of faith also comes from irresolvable inconsistencies in life, paradoxes. If you tell yourself, I'm a Muslim, but you have a father who makes you feel ashamed, or you can't reconcile between your father's behavior and Islam, or your mother's behavior and Islam, or your friend's behavior in Islam, that will always be a negative impact. And the only solution is to deliberately detach yourself psychologically and emotionally from that negative example of Islam in your life. Many kids, in the past, when I used to talk to people who write me, stuff like that, and you discover that they see their parents being very hypocritical, while they told them one thing, they acted very differently. And I told them, your relationship with Allah cannot be contingent on your relationship to your parents. In fact, you have mediated God simply through whatever influence you have. The other major thing also is what I referred to in the letter, is either behavior that is inconsistent with Islam, and you know it's inconsistent with Islam, and it weighs negatively on your conscience. So, if you like flashy things, or if things that you enjoy, that in your soul is not what you should be doing, or longings, passions, aspirations that are inconsistent with what you know Islam calls for. And these also have a very toxic impact. And bravery and absolute honesty in looking in a mirror and confronting whatever exists in your life that is inconsistent with Islamic ideals is critical if you are going to resolve these crises of faith that keep overcoming you. Because as long as the inconsistency is there, it is a doorway for shaitan. And I believe in shayateen, in demons, literally, not figuratively. And they will access you time and time and time again through these inconsistencies, through these passions or longings that are, and the way they approach you is to first drill into you that you're a hypocrite. And then you feel ashamed from God. And then you feel, rather than the sort of the easy way, the coward's way, is that I resolve my feeling of hypocrisy and my shame before God by running away from God. But it isn't long before, in order to address that sense of humiliation or sense of lowliness that comes from feeling like a hypocrite, you start resolving the contradiction by saying, well, maybe there isn't God. Well, maybe all this Islam stuff is nonsense. Why do I feel bad all the time like this? Maybe, and that is why, time and time, I found that people, especially people who commit regular sins, and they are not strong enough to stop sinning, eventually they resolve the conflict unless Allah takes mercy on them and something tragic happens in their life. But the way that we resolve the conflict is simply, after a while, first they feel like a hypocrite, first they feel ashamed, and then eventually they resolve the conflict by saying, well, there is no God. Or Islam is a religion that came from the desert, and I live here in the United States today, I'm a lawyer or I'm a doctor, and the values of the desert are not relevant to my life here. I've heard all of this a million times. I really hope that young Muslims listen to what I've just said, or not even young, because I've also encountered people just recently, a guy who, his wife wrote me, who became an atheist, and when I just looked into the matter a little bit, and as I expected, he was having an affair, a girlfriend, he's sleeping with his girlfriend. Eventually he resolved the matter by saying, well, I'm not a Muslim anymore. So it is not, if you, as I said, your soul is as integral as your body. If you put poison in your soul, if you allow toxins to enter into your soul, don't be surprised when your soul, in fact, becomes ill. You want your soul to be healthy? Protect it from negative influences, from toxins, from poison, from shayateen, which are poison, because shayateen are poison. Okay, let's take a 2-minute break, and then we'll start with number 11. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, number 11. Okay. ادفن وجودك في أرض الخمول. ادفن وجودك في أرض الخمول، فما نبت ممن لم يدفن لا يتم نتاجه. Okay, so this actually requires a little bit of explanations. So this book's translation is, bury your existence in the earth of obscurity, for whatever sprouts forth without being buried first will not complete its fruition. Which is, very good. ادفن وجودك في أرض الخمول فما نبت مما لم يدفن لا يتم نتاجه. This is one of the most critical and important principles for many different reasons. First, perhaps a good way to start this discussion is quite often in this context they will quote, or you will find the narrative from Jesus alayhi salatu wasalam, Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, where reportedly Jesus is walking with his disciple and then he says, where does a seed grow? Jesus asks his disciples, where does a seed grow? And then they say, in the soil. And he says, كذلك الحكمة لا تنبت إلا في قلب كالأرض. So, Jesus says, and so is wisdom. Wisdom cannot grow except in a heart as lowly and as basic as the soil of the earth. And what this is about essentially is humility. That all enlightenment, all understanding, all growth, all illuminations, and all relationships with the divine, the potential for a relationship with the divine, must be anchored on the ground of humility. After all these years as a teacher, as a professor, subhanAllah, it has taken me a lifetime to fully understand how all knowledge grows, emerges from humble questions, from questions that are asked humbly and answers that are sought humbly. But here, in the path of irtiqa, in the path of elevation, what they mean by this is even something further. And that is, any moral path and any path to God that is wrongfully built on the ego's desire to be known will go astray. So there are several aspects to this. One is that the path, what's anathema to the path, what is like truly toxic poison to the path, is the desire for fame. Any true scholar or any person who wants to even have any insights into divinity, any relationship with the divine, what is absolutely at odds with that is the desire for fame. And in fact, I can tell you that this would be stressed so much that it was ingrained into us that even scholars who we might admire, it was often if we, let's put it this way. My shuyukh, many times, when I would go to say, I want to attend the halaqas of such and such, and they would give me a negative response. And quite often, the negative response was because this sheikh is addicted to fame, or this sheikh likes to appear on TV all the time, or this sheikh likes to get invitations by influential and famous people. Or the desire for fame is a poison in this path. Because much of this path, the path to God and the path to moral understanding, cannot be built on a desire for people's approval. If you from the beginning long for people to approve of you and to affirm you and to praise you, then the sincerity of your relationship to the divine is sullied, is ruined. Now, there is in this context, ingrained in you are numerous ahadith or from the seerah in which the Prophet ﷺ teaches the companions not to value people by external appearances. So, I mean, among the most famous is a hadith that says, رُبَّ أَشْعَثْ أَخْبَرْ ذِي تَمْرَيْنِ تَنْبُؤُ عَنْهُ أَعْيُنِ النَّاسِ لَوْ أَقْسَمَ عَلَى اللَّهِ لَأَبَرَّهُ. What this hadith is saying is, the Prophet is teaching his companions, keep in mind that there are people who look absolutely of low status. Ash'as Akhbar means person whose hair is undone and or in a mess, full covered with dust, wearing absolute rags. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells the companions, you must understand that this person who looks this way could be closer to Allah than any of you. So much so that if he asks for anything, Allah will answer it. There are just tons of these reports. For instance, I mean, some of these reports, and this occurs in many different versions, but all the versions have basically the same elements, in which the Prophet ﷺ is walking with the companions, and then the Prophet points to someone and he says, what do you think of this person? And the answer, oh, this person is of high social status, dressed in fine clothes, looks very distinguished. This is the type of person who, if they propose to any family in marriage, they would happily accept them. And then the Prophet would point to another person and say, what do you think of this person? And they would say, oh, this person looks like he's absolutely poor. He's wearing rags. He comes from a very low social status. He's hardly known. If he proposes to any family, no family will accept him. And then the Prophet ﷺ responds by telling him, well, this person, the poor person, the person wearing the rags, is much closer or much higher in status in Allah's eyes than the other person that you just praised. There are so many different versions of this basic narrative that it must have historically occurred in some form. Yes, it is narrated in typical medieval dramatics where you have a juxtaposition between two opposites and so on. That's typical medieval way of relating a story. But the essence of the narrative must have occurred because it's reported so cumulatively and from so many other sources. So there must have been a historical incident in which the companions, the Prophet told the companions, look, this person who looks so lowly in your eyes is in fact higher than you would imagine, was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are other reports like this. One of the most famous, and this is, I wish we taught our children in school about this, but there's this character in the seerah called Uwais, and Uwais al-Quni. The reason he is a character is actually quite fascinating. The Prophet ﷺ, the essence of these narratives, and again, they are so cumulative, there are so many of them that report the same thing in the basic, but in many different versions, is the Prophet ﷺ tells the companions, there is a man who's going to come. This man is called Uwais al-Quwaini. And Uwais is a convert to Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ tells the companions, this man, Uwais, is extremely pious and is closer to Allah. It has achieved a status of nearness to Allah that is truly admirable. So the companions, of course, who is this man that they don't know? And when Uwais shows up in Medina, now, how whether the Prophet knew that Uwais is coming through a miracle because God told him, or because he received his intelligence network told him, it doesn't matter. But he knew that Uwais is coming to Medina, and he tells the companions of how special Uwais is. And of course, upon arriving, all the companions want to talk to Uwais. After all, he has such a special status. But they immediately notice that Uwais is extremely poor, has absolutely nothing, doesn't own a horse, doesn't own a camel, doesn't own sheep, doesn't own a donkey, is wearing absolute rags that hardly cover his body. But even more, when they go to Uwais and they start talking to Uwais, Uwais goes out of his way to claim that he knows nothing. But Uwais, the Prophet praised you and said you are a man of great spiritual status. And Uwais responds, I know nothing, ask me nothing. And Uwais runs away from them. The story of Uwais goes on because there are many narratives about Uwais and his character, in that after the Prophet ﷺ dies, when the fame of Uwais as the man who the Prophet praised before he died, as a man of great piety, reverberates, and Umar ibn al-Khattab tries to honor Uwais and give him a special position because he was praised. And Uwais, the minute anyone recognizes Uwais and tells him, "Oh, you're the man the Prophet praised," Uwais disappears. So one of the funny stories, about him, is that if I can remember it, okay. Hold on. I'll try to paraphrase it from memory. Is that he's in the market, and I forgot the name of the companion, but it was one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ that recognizes him and says, "Oh my God, you're Uwais." And Uwais says, "No, I'm not." And he says, "No, I know you. You are Uwais. And you are the man the Prophet." And he says, "Okay, where are you going?" He says, "I'm going this way." He says, "Okay, good, because I'm going the opposite way." So Uwais, and he disappears. And the next day, the companion looks for Uwais everywhere, and they told him Uwais ran away. And the reason you get the Uwais, although of this very special relationship, the Prophet ﷺ himself said that Uwais had this very special status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Uwais guards his humility to the extreme. I want to be praised by no one. I don't want to be recognized by anyone. And anytime anyone is going to start somehow feeding my ego, and eventually Uwais dies as a martyr. And there is a story, Allahu Alam, about historically, is that Allahu Alam, reportedly Uwais, when he is about to die, he tells him, "Bury me in an iron-marked grave. I don't want people to praise me after my death." And when he dies, they mark his grave. Because, of course, the myth of Uwais and his humility and according to the story, is that they come the next day and the mark on his grave had disappeared. Allahu Alam. So they understood from that Allah honored his wishes even if they had failed to do so. Now, this same principle of دفن النفس في أرض الخمول, and what it is, those who are not familiar with the linguistic practice, they think أرض الخمول means in the land of inactivity. Khumul in modern Arabic means inactivity, but in medieval Arabic and in the usage of Sufi text, khumul doesn't mean inactivity, it means obscurity. That the past must be built on a sincere relationship in which the desire for fame or the desire for approval does not sully it and does not corrupt it. And also added to another class of ahadith that you're taught at this juncture, or emphasized, is that there are numerous human beings who are nobodies on earth, who are superstars in the heavens. And that the path to Allah, or the path to knowledge, the path to morality, must be anchored on the desire to be such a superstar in the heavens, but a non-entity on this earth. In other words, if fame comes, it comes despite of you, not because you seek it or go after it. Most of us have heard of the story of Hamid al-Ghazali, who was a distinguished professor, and then he realizes, or he confronts himself with the reality that he cares about fame and prestige far more than he cares about the real substance of his relationship with Allah. And Hamid al-Ghazali resigns his distinguished post as a professor and goes in obscurity, goes into isolation for a number of years to rebuild his relationship with Allah. And Hamid al-Ghazali, in his own narrative, his own seerah, his own memoir, wrote about how during that period he wore jild thawr, the skin of a bull, which is something that poor people wore. If you're rich, you wore threaded clothes. If you're poor, you wear animal skin and things like that. He wore a bull's skin, and he went to a sheikh known as Khazar, which he became his disciple, and Khazar would give al-Ghazali, who used to be a distinguished law professor, would assign al-Ghazali the task of sweeping the market floor, kans al-sawq, that he would go to the souk and he would sweep and clean the marketplace. And his teacher would also require him to carry a qurba. A qurba is a water skin, a sack made of animal skin with water in it. And he would be a saki. He would basically, people would go to, if people want to drink, he would pour drink for them, water, in the market. These are very lowly jobs at that time. And even today, I mean, someone who just basically is handing water to thirsty people in the market and cleaning the marketplace. The reason Ghazali did this, and the reason Khazar put him to this, is activating this principle. Also, now, in practice, when you get to this principle, this is where your teacher, if you have a good teacher, would assign you service, and service that is to be not service that you would find comfortable or honorable or consistent with your self-perception and your pride. In fact, service that would humble you. So it is service that would be inconsistent with your perceived status in society, and especially with your self-perception. It is service that flattens your ego. So, because it is, as the saying by Jesus says, that where things grow is in the soil. If you don't put a seed in the soil, in the mud, a plant will not grow. And so is the construction of enlightenment and the construction of a true moralist or a true person with moral perception, with hikmah, is that it must grow in the effacement of the self. One of the very common mistakes done by students, and you see this among modern Muslims all the time, is that they start the path by comparing themselves to their teachers. A fatal mistake of the ego. If you have a teacher that you trust, any comparison between you and your teacher is a product of an inflated ego that will act as an absolute impediment to your spiritual growth. Your teacher became your teacher, if it's a teacher worthy of the name, because your teacher has gone through a path of khumul, a path of humbling that is very extensive. If you have, again, and in the age we live in, I have to keep saying this because there are so many people out there that are not qualified as teachers, but nevertheless, they assume. Your path cannot begin with the assumption of equality. Your path must begin with the assumption of humility. Because your path is going to be very individual to you. And your path will never mirror the path of another. Even if you are not training to be a scholar or a student of hikmah or a murid, the same does apply in that the greatest obstacle to awareness of your Lord, of a relationship with your Lord, is the ego. All types of veils will melt before your eyes as you humble yourself. And the more you humble yourself, the more it is like when you go in and you say, in order to teach you something, I need a clean slate. Because as long as what is written on your slate is egotistical, that egoism will interfere in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For lovers, they drill this in you. العمل من أجل النفس منافي للإخلاص عند المحبين. For lovers, those who want to love Allah must put aside the self. They neither want a reward for the self, nor do they want to avoid punishment for the self. They want to know the self, to understand the self without any frills or augmentations or falsehood, to know the self, because the more they know their self, they will know their Lord. And essential to this is that you train yourself, especially in your beginning, that you لا يكره الذم من الخلق ولا يحب المدح من الخلق, that you neither want praise nor do you care about criticism or condemnation. There are numerous stories about that you're taught about students and in the process of training in this path of khumul, and I'll just share with you some of the most famous of them. There is, let me see if this guy mentions it. It will make things easier. Yeah. So, yeah, he doesn't. There is a story of it's often it's mentioned without a name, but in some other texts there is a name associated with this guy. I forgot the name, but it doesn't matter. So he's a well-known scholar, and he comes into Baghdad. He arrives in Baghdad, and when he arrives in Baghdad, because he's a well-known scholar, he is immediately invited to meet the governor of Baghdad. But he knows that meeting the governor is being involved with people who are all about prestige and about appearances and about all these false things. So as the story goes, that he goes and he buys a bunch of onions. And as soon as he can run away, he tried to escape, but then the governor might become suspicious that he's a rebel, and this was a time in which the Abbasids were, a lot of people were accused of being sympathetic with the Alawiyin, with the supporters of the Ahl al-Bayt, and so on. So anyway, so he goes, he answers the invitation, but as he's waiting to meet the governor, he starts munching on these onions. And of course, the guards tell the governor, this guy that you're inviting out there, he's sitting there having a feast with onions. And the governor says he's an idiot. What type of scholar sits there munching on onions as he's waiting to meet me? And he says, I don't want to meet him, tell him I'm busy. And of course, he's extremely happy. And the story goes down in the annals of history because of that. Other famous stories. Now here, there is a student who is, his teacher tells him that there are different versions of the story, but one of the versions that I like is that the student tells the teacher, you know, I have been doing dhikr and, you know, doing a lot of these ibadat, worship, and I don't feel any of the things that you talk about. And the teacher knows this about the student, and he tells him, you want to have the sweetness, you want to feel the sweetness of what we're talking about? And he says, yes. He says, okay, I want you to go to the souk, and I want you to take what are like peanuts, and offer free peanuts to any child that slaps you on the face. So you go to the souk and you do a thorough exercise in humiliation. There are two versions of the story. One version is that he said no way and he left. Another version is that he didn't. Allahu A'lam. But there, because of this principle, there is a whole class of Sufism known as the Malamatiyya. The Malamatiyya took this principle to an extreme. And that is, they would actively act to not just not be praised, but to actually be condemned by society. So among the most famous stories is a well-known Sufi, I forgot his name, but it's in the text, who goes to the bathhouse and he steals people's clothes. And the reason he steals people's clothes is because he wants people to catch him and condemn him as a robber. And so the Malamatiya would go out of their way to do things that would make people disrespect them. For instance, pretending to drink wine, they would sit somewhere out in the street and they would have grape juice, but people don't know it's grape juice. But they pretend that they're actually drinking alcohol, and even pretend to become intoxicated, and they do so people can disrespect them and criticize them. And they would, the more disrespected they are by people, the more they rejoice, because they believed that the ego needs to be fought, even to the point of extremities. The Malamati there are some very famous Malamati Sufis, but it's its own tariqah, and a very difficult one. Okay, let's see if I'm forgetting anything. Okay. But of course, the majority of good teachers didn't go as far as the Malamatiya. The exercises of humility, especially as you're beginning the path, would anchor on serving others and actively rejecting or actively resisting any fame, so that your intentions, you are training to keep your intentions pure. Among the very famous shuyukh, some of you might know him, he passed away, Sheikh Sha'rawi in Egypt. I know that when Sheikh Sha'rawi was a superstar. Sheikh Sha'rawi, his tafsir of the Quran became so famous that he just, despite himself, he became a superstar. I mean, he was on TV, and people, wherever he would go, people would gravitate to him. And I know that Sheikh Sha'rawi, so often after a halaqah in which people are praising him and so on the way home, he would have the car stop, whether his students or his family, and he would go into a mosque and clean the toilets in mosques. And he would say, and of course, the older he got, it's like, what are you doing? Why are you cleaning the toilet in mosques on the way? And he would say, because myself has to remain humble. I must never allow myself to forget who I am. And myself needs the exercise of cleaning these disgusting toilets. I mean, I was there a couple of times, and I mean, of course, all of us would offer to, let us help, and he would yell at us and say, get out, I don't want your help in cleaning the toilets. But it stayed with me because some of these toilets were very disgusting, were very gross. And still, I mean, I can't tell you how much of a superstar he was. And there are very similar things that Sheikh Ghazali, Allah yarhamu wa ahsan ilayh, also did. I mean, he would make it a point to basically be like a babysitter and serve the children in his neighbor's children. And he would always say, I'm disciplining myself. Leave me alone. Myself needs this. It is one of the hardest things to achieve and one of the most beautiful things to achieve. Ardul Khumul is, and that is also why it is ingrained in you that any scholar that you find gravitating to rulers, the prestige of being invited by rulers and being a VIP guest and arriving in the airport through the VIP treatment and VIP special process and procedures, and immediately that scholar would become of no credibility. And regardless of the amount of their knowledge, they become a persona non grata. In my madhab and in the madhab of, and that is why when I find Sufis today, or people who claim to be Sufis, and they're buddy-buddy with rulers, and especially corrupt rulers and tyrannical rulers, they're an embarrassment to Sufism. They are far from authentic or legitimate Sufis. They have betrayed their own principles ages ago. Okay. For the story of Uwais, just this last point and then I'll move on. Uwais, when Umar ibn Khattab was the caliph, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he wanted to honor Uwais al-Qarni, so Uwais told him, يا أمير المؤمنين لا ميعاد بيني وبينك ولا أعرفك ولا تعرفني بعد اليوم ثم دفع الإبل التي كان يرعاها إلى أصحابها وخلى عن الرعاية. What it's saying is that Weiss, he worked as a cattle herder, and when Umar ibn Khattab found him, because Weiss was always running away, and Umar al-Khattab found him, and he was the caliph, and he said, what is this? You're herding cattle. We come, we want to honor you. We want to learn from you, etc., etc. And so Uwais told him, Amir al-Mu'mineen, or caliph, there is no appointment between me and you. You and I will not meet. After today, you don't know me and I don't know you. And he gave the animals he was herding back to their owner and left the entire city. The stories of Uwais al-Qarni are fascinating. They're when I was younger, they used to really intrigue me. Okay, where are we now? So let's go to 12. Okay. ما نفع القلب شيء مثل عزلة يدخل بها ميدان فكرة فكرة ما نفع القلب شيء مثل عزلة يدخل بها ميدان فكرة. Okay, so translation. Basic translation: nothing benefits the heart more than a spiritual seclusion whereby it enters the domain of true reflections. Pretty close. Okay. So nothing is as good for the heart like a seclusion in which this seclusion one engages in, and fikra here is, you could translate it as reflection, as meditation. A lot of people are surprised that in Islam and in Sufism, there is a long history of the practice of meditation. Now, and it all focuses on this issue of fikra. The fikra, you could be reflecting on creation, you could be reflecting on life, you could be reflecting on the relationship of God to creation, but you could also, and this is what you learn from later Sufi texts, and there are some modern studies on the relationship between Buddhism and Islam that you can read some of the stuff in. You could also be reflecting on your own body and your own self. You can put the self before a mirror and you reflect deeply onto the self. You could be reflecting on energy centers in the body and flow of energy within the self. In other words, the art of the fikra is a whole genre, it's a whole body of nature. The difference is all meditation in Islam has Allah at the center of the meditation. Even if you are meditating on energy centers in the body, you are ultimately trying to understand how the personal energy, the energy within the self, relates to the source of all energy. I mean, and modern meditation is something else. I mean, it has its whatever. But there's a whole realm here, is that the purpose of, I mean, the art of al-fikra, reflection or meditation or both, is something that you are supposed to, if you have a teacher, your teacher is supposed to give you a program of reflection and meditation that you engage in your uzla. What if you don't have a teacher? Seclusion and reflection is critical for self-insight. So even if you don't have a teacher, and let me elaborate upon this. The Prophet ﷺ said again, there are many versions of this hadith, or many different reports of the same that the Prophet ﷺ says, "Al-qulubu tasda' kama yasda' al-hadid." That hearts rust like metal rusts. وَالْإِيمَانُ يَبْلَى, and Iman can wither away. Hearts can rust and Iman can wither away. So, in fact, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Al-Iman yabla kama yabla thawb," that Iman can wither away just like clothes, falls apart. So, what is the solution? The self is often described as a mirror, a mir'ah. And what is reflected in this mirror is what you will experience in the nafs. So, if what is reflected in the mirror is akhlat means while you tell the self, I want to be a beautiful self, I want to be a merciful self, I want to be a generous self, I want to be a devout self. But what you reflect in this mirror, the images that come into this mirror are not beautiful. That's why, for instance, pornography can have a devastating effect, because it is what is reflected in your mirror. And when your mirror is not full of God, you long to fill it. And when you long to fill it, it can be full with because the nafs will pick up whatever you expose it to. So, as the Sufis say, كلما تراكمت فيها صور الأشياء. If what you reflect in this mirror is صور الأشياء, meaning the image of material things, what that nafs will then give back to you are material things. If what you allow to reflect in the mirror of the self ugly things, what it will give back to you is ugly things. If you, so just your nafs is like, when Allah allowed us to discover film, one of the most intelligent comments I read is that this was Allah teaching us the nature of the self. It is like film. Whatever you expose it to, it will be imprinted on it. And there are things that imprint on the nafs that are very hard to get rid of, or to print something over it. And so, كلما تراكمت فيها صور الأشياء, the more you expose it to material things, انطمس نورها واشتد حجابها, then its light will be extinguished and the veil will set before your eyes. So, they also say, one of the things that you learn is that al-qalb kal-ma'da, the heart is like your stomach. If you put in your stomach a lot of different unhealthy things, you throw in your stomach cold things and hot things and, spicy things and, I don't know, outdated things that date of expiration have passed, then your stomach is going to get sick. What you're going to feel is what you put into your stomach is what you feel in your stomach. The nafs is like that. So what the uzla, the purpose of the uzla, the purpose of the seclusion, is that you reflect upon the mirror and you ask yourself a very difficult question. It is easy to ask, but very difficult in practice. What is imprinted on my mirror? And to seek to reflect, this is the exercise that your teacher puts you to at the very beginning. What is reflected onto your mirror? Unload everything reflected onto your mirror. Go in seclusion and reflect. What is reflected onto this mirror? Because unless you cleanse the mirror and return it to its pristine shape, so that what will imprint on it are your experiences with Allah, it is very difficult for the mirror to receive the divine if it has all types of, as they say, suwar al-ashya, which are material things imprinted on it. So your mirror is imprinted by the food you like, the clothes you like, the furniture you like, the prestige of this, the people you have crushes on, the people you want approval from, the people that have your friends. Your mirror is imprinted with a gazillion different things. There's no place for the divine. Allah can't imprint on it. The space available for Allah to imprint is very small or non-existent. And that is the purpose of al-uzla wal-fikra. It is not just meditation. At first, you cleanse, and then you start meditating on things, depending on the school you come from, whether the understanding your body and understanding the flow of energy in your body, or whether understanding the nature of energy in creation, or understanding you go into steps that, and the purpose is to consistently imprint through these reflections things that are beatific and pure and luminous in the self. Among the things also, okay. Imam Hassan al-Basri, a lot of this, by the way, I'm skipping a lot, but a lot of this go back to Imam Ali radiallahu anhu, Imam Hassan al-Basri. So Imam Hassan al-Basri, for instance, is very famous for saying that al-fikra mir'atun turika hasanuka min sayyi'ak, that the purpose of the fikra is to inspect that mirror so that you can see in it the evil and the good. See in it what is ugly and what is beautiful. But among the most important lessons is in the following. وهي فكرة الأضداد. And let me see, okay. There is عالم الحس. عالم الحس is the world of what is felt and what is seen, the physical world. That's عالم الحس. Now, عالم الحس, what you feel, what you experience by touch, by taste, by sight, is in itself not discerning. You experience the physical world, and what the physical world gives you often is an association between an experience and an emotion, what we call in our modern world triggers. So you experience something and it triggers you for better or for worse. It triggers you good memories, it triggers you bad memories, it triggers you neutral memories, it triggers you. And you have all these triggers from the alam al-his, from the material world, the experienced world. And what becomes entrenched, especially, are triggers that cut deep and triggers that are the results of habit. So I smell coffee, I have certain set of emotions because of habit, because I habitually do something, and that habit gives me a sense of feeling, a sense of security, a sense of comfort, a sense of whatever. Now, the thing though is that if you are simply experiencing and being triggered, and there is no disciplining agent in this dynamic, what you often have is adad, or opposites. You have triggers that take you one way and triggers that take you out another way, but you don't have deliberate moral agency. You are the sum total, you are the result of whims, of triggers, emotions that are either positive or negative, but there is no deliberate moral choice, often because we are not accustomed to deliberate moral choices. We might think we're exercising deliberate moral choices, but in fact we're not. We are exercising habit, and we are exercising positive emotions, negative emotions, but not a deliberate awareness of what is beautiful and what is ugly, what we want to be a part of our mirror, what we don't want to be a part of our mirror, what contributes to our relationship to Allah, what doesn't contribute to our relationship to Allah. And the purpose of isolation and reflection is to catch what they say, والانقياد إلى هوى النفس والأنس بعالم الحس, is to interrogate yourself as to what have become habitual comforts, not the result of moral choice, of moral deliberation, but the choice of sensual impulses, habits. And by identifying these things as the results of habits, that in itself then allows you to interrogate them as to whether they are consistent with your moral deliberation or not. So another way, there's a very famous statement in this context. They say, "Man kathurat lahazatuh, damat hasaratuh." This is something you memorize, meaning al-lahazat are emotional whimsies, things that you experience as a result of emotional impulses. Someone said something that rubbed me the wrong way. Someone did something that made me feel slighted. Someone said something that made me feel happy about myself. All of these are lahazat. Lahazat, why? Because you are reacting to positive or negative conditioning. There is no moral deliberation in this. The more yourself is constituted of these moral reactions, these sensual reactions, the more your hasarat means the more your anxieties and your sorrows, i.e., the more your instability. Do you know these people that are, they just go through anxiety and there's no rhyme or reason. It's just anxious and they feel like they've got to do something. Well, do something like what? Well, just something. Let's just go out. Let's just bury myself in a TV program. Let's just play a video game and run from myself. This is a sure sign that you are in the world of lahazat. You are in a world of your mirror is being constantly imprinted by impulsive reactions to things, and that you have very little in terms of self-perception and self-cleansing, where you notice what is being imprinted and become a gatekeeper for what you allow to imprint onto the self and what you don't allow to imprint onto yourself. Where you say, does this make sense that I feel slighted? Because in truth, very rarely is a human slighting you actually a rational thing. Does it really make sense that I feel offended? Because very rarely is a human offending you in the sense of affecting your mirror will make rational sense. But you must become adept at being the gatekeeper for what imprints onto the soul, onto the nafs. And that takes practice. And the practice comes from exactly that, the isolation and the fikra, the reflection. Let's see if I'm forgetting. Yeah. I made note of this. There is it somewhere? I don't think so. Very similar to this. This is just something that I stuck with me. That one of it's in the Bible. I forgot where, but Jesus says, alayhi salatu wassalam, لا تجالسوا الموتى, and that's Arabic New Testament, obviously, that don't make it a habit to sit with the dead. And he is asked, who are the dead? And he describes the dead as those who are المحبون للدنيا, those who their passion is for this material world. You're taught this in the same context of your mirror is extremely, your nafs is it's the most valuable thing you own. And who you spend your time with will imprint on the self. And ask yourself, those who you spend the most time with, are they mauta? Are they dead? Or are they living? And living here more means deliberate moral agents. They live a moral life with a moral purpose. And I intentionally use the word, the language of moral deliberation, because my experience was the not just the Hikam, but this entire path is that if this path would become decolonized, it would use the language of the age. And the language of the age is moral deliberation. That's what we mean by hikmah. And the difference is between those who live a life talking about, gossiping, who did what, talking about prestige and, gossip, talking about things they like to consume, in other words, and that's not moral deliberation. But unfortunately, that's the majority of human beings. Again, if you don't want a path to Allah, if you don't want to fall in love with Allah, don't worry about it. Then that path is fine. Your nafs is a mix. Your nafs is probably hopelessly ruined. But if you want a path, if you want to understand Allah, then you need to worry about your nafs. What time is it? 9:40?
Almost.
Okay. Other things that I should share, and then we'll stop, is that famous hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that that if a person, every time a person commits a sin, the Prophet describes a sin as نكتت في قلبه خطيئة. So that it's as if the person's heart becomes blotched by a black mark, نكتة سوداء, that it's as if a black blotch. Now, if you ask Allah for forgiveness, one of the most common misconceptions is that just because Allah forgives you, that erases the blotch on the heart. That erases the sin in your book with Allah in the hereafter. But unfortunately, every sin you commit leaves a black blotch onto the heart, onto a nafs, that can only be cleansed by confronting the sin and confronting why, the reason, in other words, gaining mastery over the self, so that if the sin is a result of weakness, you understand your own weakness. It is like, and so when in the exercises that we used to do, is your sheikh would, again, this is before you go into uzla, into isolation, would say, I want you to reflect upon the sins that could have left a black mark onto your heart. And I want you to write it out. Put for every sin that you believe left a black mark onto your heart. And the first time you do it, I mean, I don't know how, but I had not too many black marks. But as the sheikh pushes you, you discover more and more and more black marks. And then you come and say, okay, there are all these black marks. And then comes the question, okay, so what are you going to do? Imagine that this is a mirror, and that this mirror have all these blotches, all these stains. What are you going to do to clean them? How are you going to clean them? Have you understood the nature of every sin and why? Those sins that were the results of anger, those sins that were the results of jealousy, those sins that were the results of weakness, the sins that were results of entitlement, so many sins, it's because you feel, well, I deserve love. Well, when am I going to have another opportunity to do X, Y, Z? Or I deserve this, or I deserve that. And the result of this dynamic is that you gain an understanding in yourself that is amazing. Again, do you need a sheikh to do it? Well, obviously a sheikh greatly helps. But you can do these exercises by yourself, by seclusion and reflection. Just be disciplined. Keep a diary. Keep track of what you've done, what you've covered, go back and listen to this halaqah. I've given you so many examples from the training, but you can keep a diary if you want to discipline yourself, and you will see how your relationship with Allah grows. You will see, without teachers, without anything, you will see how Allah becomes closer to you than ever. Final point, Imam Ali radiallahu anhu says something that I've always loved. It says the heart is like a compass. If the heart faces the direction of light, ashraqat, it will be as if the sun has come up. If the heart faces the direction of darkness, it will be overcome by darkness. If the heart facilitates between the direction of light and darkness, it keeps going back and forth, it is overcome by shadows. The heart here is the nafs. What direction is your heart facing? You ask me, well, how do I know? Well, who are the people that surround you? Who are your friends? Who are your influences? Who are the people that you listen to? How do you spend your time? Do you spend your time seeking the light, facing the light, or facing darkness, or facing shadows? Gray, in other words, neither light nor darkness. Because in direct proportion to where you're facing is the degree of light and luminosity in the nafs. But the more clean and clear and luminous the nafs, the more Allah will enter this nafs with ease, will fill the space into this nafs, and you will understand and see things from your Lord that you could not have imagined you would see one day. That is how people issue warranties. I'm telling you, this is a warranty. It has never failed. I don't know of a single example in history in which it failed. It was cleansing that mirror. Okay, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We haven't quite finished 13. Is this 13 or 12? 12. No, we actually finished 12. We finished 12. So, inshallah, next halaqah we start with 13. I mean, to interrogate myself, I started out with weakness of faith, and then I covered two principles. You know, I had told myself I'm going to finish up to 16 today. So I hope I didn't waste your time, and I hope it was all useful. And I wasn't just blabbering on. Okay.
All right, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It's never a waste of time because all of it is, we don't hear it anywhere else, and it's so powerful. And everything that you shared is, directly applicable to, us transcending and knowing ourselves better. And it's, I mean, you gave us so much today, and every time we go through this, there's just such a wealth of knowledge to really reflect on. Interestingly, when you were talking about something that you have called before the tyranny of the nervous system, right? It's kind of
That's right,
becoming just sort of a reaction to whatever you feel, whether you're hungry, whether you're angry, whether you're whatever. And you've taught us before about gaining mastery over those emotions, but you really delved into a lot deeper, which was really powerful. And the idea of becoming the gatekeeper of what imprints on your soul. Like so much of this language, this new language we're learning, and this new approach really continues to emphasize empowerment at the foundationally, and kind of pushing back on the things that we just receive passively, but knowing that we can actually take a very active role in becoming moral agents, or as you say, having deliberate moral choice in our lives. And the idea of whether you are dead or alive, like dead meaning very passionate about the things in the material world, or alive being very deliberate in your moral choices. It's so beautiful. And it is even important to talk about meditation, because we get so much information about these sort of spiritual, new agey, meditative ways. I mean, I think it was just very valuable to know that in the meditation in Islam has such a deep history, but it's always about God at the center. And then the idea of a mirror, for me also, it was very powerful when you said, the idea of film, right? The negative, like what you are exposing camera film to imprints on that film. And then if you think about how hard it is to, remove that or become aware of it, it gives you a sense of how powerful of an effect it can have on your soul. And then the last part of the discussion about sin, and how it's important to understand that when you commit sin, it leaves that black mark on your heart that requires work. And we've talked about before, and this is something that you taught me very early on in my conversion, about understanding, like when you ask for forgiveness, you can't just sort of generally say, God, please forgive me. But if you really have to know specifically, what are you asking God for forgiveness for? Like, forgive me because I did X, because I was X, and that very hard, painful work of confronting yourself with honesty and, before God, because God obviously knows what you did. God obviously saw it. But if you don't know and don't take the time to really confront it and internalize it, then it's impossible to gain mastery over it and even be able to promise yourself that you'll never do it again, right? If you are committing sins out of anger all the time, but you never realize that, then you'll never gain mastery until you actually understand what you're capable of, good and bad. So this was so valuable, just for, again, that this whole journey of knowing ourselves and how to elevate, how to be empowered, how to have confidence in ourselves, So it's priceless. Honestly, it's priceless information. And, don't rush. Take your time. Share with us whatever strikes you, because all of it is so valuable, especially in this time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This was fabulous, and I look forward to our next session. And it's okay that we've only covered 2 because we went really deep. So it was wonderful. So you guys have a wonderful week, and inshallah, we will see you next week for another session.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.